So I'm Louisa Krug. I'm the Destination Districts Manager at the Tulsa Planning Office, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's session. So thank you for joining us for our first panel of the day, entitled Engagement Strategies for Equitable Transportation Planning. This panel will focus on the how and why of engagement within our transportation planning work and seeks to uncover tangible ideas for incorporating equity within our engagement processes. This panel is sponsored by the Oklahoma Highway Safety Office, Lobeck Taylor Family Foundation, and OU Urban Design Studio. So joining us today are three professionals representing three different tiers of the planning process. So at the regional level, we have Reagan McManus, who is the director of the Indian Nations Council of Governments Area Agency on Aging. At the city level, we have Alyssa Rodriguez, the Director of Information Technology at the City of Henderson and President of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, supporting transportation professionals nationwide with technical and professional development. And joining us at the grassroots level is Katie Zimmerman, the Executive Director of Transportation Advocacy Organization Charleston Moves in Charleston, South Carolina. So like the other sessions today, we will hear from our panelists and then you can add questions to the Q&A and then we will get to those at the end. So I think that we will take the screen sharing down so we can just kind of have a conversation between these three individuals. So just to start, recognizing that you all are approaching transportation planning from a different perspective, can you speak to what role engagement plays in your work, how it influences your work, and just any insight into how this role has changed or evolved over time for you and your work? We'll start with Reagan, and then we'll hear from Alyssa and Katie.
Good morning, and of course you had to pick on your fellow NCOGer first. Engagement plays a huge role in the work that we do at the Area Agency on Aging. So not only do we do transportation services and planning, we do a variety of other home and community-based services. So when we're developing our 4-year strategic plan, we do public engagement activities such as discussion groups, surveys, public hearings. And then I'll specifically speak to a past transportation planning and implementation grant that we had a couple of years ago. Community engagement played a massive role in our work. We had focus groups, we did a large survey distribution, we did community meetings, and we had field experiences. Sometimes I think as planners and gerontologists, we sometimes think we know all the answers and the needs, and we really don't. So our engagement has definitely shifted to more of an inclusive, interacting and listening opportunity where we, as in us, the professionals and the participants, mutually discuss and learn in an effort to really get to the root of the problems, the concerns, and then ultimately the solutions on both sides of the field, for them and for us as professionals. So it's better, we found, to really take that type of approach versus the talk to or talk at approach with just, limited questions and answer availability.
Well, at ITE, we're a community of transportation professionals, and our original name was Transportation Engineers, but we've kind of started trending towards using the acronym just so that we can emphasize that all transportation professionals are welcome in our organization. And to simplify it, really what we do at the organization is provide technical resources for our members and also networking opportunities so that members can share their expertise and experiences with each other. And over the years, that has definitely evolved. I think we went at the engagement and the equity topic kind of indirectly. We had resources on context-sensitive solutions for transportation professionals. We've spent a lot of time developing resources for complete streets that reallocate the use of the right-of-way to a multitude of different uses. And we've also spent a lot of time on safety and how to develop safe systems and how to evaluate and existing and future projects from a safety lens. We are organized by technical and employer councils, and each year those technical and employer councils put out an emerging trends report just to hear what our members are looking for and to put a little more detail into specific topics of things that are really of importance to our membership. And this last session of that report, we heard very clearly that equity was at the forefront of what they were concerned about. And so, and specifically, a component of that is just the engagement piece of how to recognize what populations need that special care and additional focus and interest. And so we've been conducting listening sessions throughout this year to, we utilize those listening sessions to determine where ITE should lead, who we should be collaborating with, and what we should be following. And we just finished our third session yesterday, and we have 2 more coming up. And from all of those, we hope to be developing some action items for our international organization and developing some more resources. So I guess in summary, it has come from, tackling the issue of engagement and equity from a more indirect to a more direct focused strategy.
Thank you. Katie?
Thanks. We're a small nonprofit advocacy group in Charleston, and staff of 2, including myself. So for us, engagement is pretty much everything when it comes to actually achieving safe and connected and equitable spaces in Charleston County. And we're also, South Carolina is really only finally recognizing the need to serve and protect vulnerable road users. So, I've lived here 23 years, and asking for safe biking and walking and transit infrastructure 23 years ago, that was simply that was laughed at. It's taken a while for us to shift, and that shift has really only just begun recently. So engagement with what we do at Charleston Moves is everything, because we have to build that critical mass of voices, and it needs to be representative voices as well. We can't just have the same, it's not effective to have the same, 5 folks in spandex showing up and asking for stuff. Not to, the spandex cycling crowd is an important element. They are part of the community, but we need to make space for other voices in that realm. So what we really make sure to do is, we've got our usual electronic ways of communicating with folks, but we also have to be very careful that we don't overload people and send them too much to do, because then they just stop responding and they get overwhelmed. But we also, at least pre-COVID, had to make sure we were out in the community quite a bit and talking with neighborhoods and hearing from them what they want to see, not Charleston Moves deciding, okay, we think that you all should have this and this is what we're going to advocate for, but having folks telling us what they want to see, and then we're better prepared when we have a seat at the table to advocate for what folks have declared is needed for their communities. So really, if we're not reaching the community, if we're not engaging the community, we are failing in our work on all counts.
So that really leads really well into our next question, which is, when we say equitable engagement, it can mean a range of platforms, tools, contact methods, and more. So can you talk more about the formation of engagement strategies for planning initiatives, and just share how you start to frame that engagement strategy, and when you start to consider equity, when you're kind of in the planning to plan stage of the project? What technical tools you use, how they change based on your focus. So Katie, since you were just talking about that, we could start with you and then hear from Reagan and Alyssa.
Sure. Yeah. So we get involved. Well, we try to get involved on the front end of every project that comes along, especially because, allocating public resources for multimodal, it's very limited. So we want to make sure to leverage as much as possible. South Carolina is also a little bit unique in that our state DOT is the 4th largest DOT in the country as far as roadway miles that the state owns and maintains. So they have most of the control when it comes to what can be implemented and what cannot. But they aren't paying for it. So the locals are expected to pay for it. DOT, a lot of what we're leveraging is when DOT is ready to resurface something, can we get a bike lane striped in that process? And does it even make sense for a bike lane to be on that road? Assessing where are the transit stops? Can we get a bus pull out? All different things like that. So depending on the project, usually we'll kind of weasel our way in on the front end, start bothering staff and others, and determining what makes sense to what and when it makes sense to bring in the public. So if the municipality has a plan for engagement, we think the plan makes sense, then of course we'll try to get the word out to as many people as possible. If we feel like things are missing, or there's just a gap in what's being proposed, it doesn't match with what we know people want to see, or there is not as much access to the public on what they can weigh in on, we will get people involved in that as well. We'll, reach out to our folks in different neighborhoods and say, all right, you all need to start getting loud about this because it's getting glossed over and we're going to miss this opportunity in this project. So the planners need to hear from you now. So it's all very dependent on the type of project, where it is, how much it's going to cost, and how the municipality is coming along with their planning strategy. And I have a specific project example that can kind of point to that, called the North Bridge, where we're kind of stepping in on the outreach side of things, because there's a big gap in how the community is going to be reached on that project that probably we'll get into a little bit more later in the panel.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. Reagan?
Our equity considerations really come in from the get-go. We have very specific, target audience, target populations for not only transportation planning, but all of our services. And those are, our older adults. That's our population. We serve 60 and older, and their caregivers. Then our real targeted populations are low income, our disabled, our minority, isolated individuals, and things of that nature. So our top priority in any of our planning or service implementation is to reach, engage, and provide services to that target audience. So that it's just straight from the get-go. Then when we we always know our engagement strategies are going to have to be handled with very little to no technology options. Our population does not have great access to internet for either, they're not comfortable with it. They don't have, the financial resources to afford that in their monthly expenses, things like that. So we really keep things simple when we're developing our strategies, and we focus on in-person events, mailings, simplistic mailings, not long, lengthy letters, and working with community partners who can help us either spread the word, gather information, help us get people to these events, or other social service organizations in those specific communities who work on behalf of our target populations. So that's kind of the angle that we go to when we are pre-planning for planning events. So
with the pandemic, obviously, I'm sure you've struggled a bit, and it's interesting because I think for a lot of people, the move to internet in some ways has made things easier, but only for certain populations.
Absolutely.
So it's just very interesting to hear you talk about that. Alyssa, do you want to add anything?
Sure. And Katie, I appreciate your perseverance. I know things have started to evolve over the last, 20 years. I've been in the transportation industry about that long, and I know what you're talking about, that it was really hard to get a bike lane into something 20 years ago. And thankfully, those things are evolving now. So I think our perspective on engagement changes depending on the scope of the project and our goals of the project. So if we are looking at, say, a walk to school plan and improving the walking facilities for kids on the way to their classrooms, it's a lot about the engagement of the neighborhood, and specifically speaking with the parents and the families that live in that area, and making sure that you are contacting them at a time that's convenient. And I've had a few experiences where the teachers at the school helped me translate because they were, it was a primarily Spanish speaking population in that community. And just taking the time to listen to what their concerns are. I know there was a specific school at the city of North Las Vegas when I was there that they had a traffic signal right at the corner that made from a objective or from my perspective, I guess it was, well, you got a traffic signal there, so it's easy to cross, right? Well, the entrance to the school was 300 feet away and adjacent to the parking, and so if you are going to go pick up your kid, you want to take the shortest route possible. And so once we sat down and listened to them and just had a really great conversation with the parents at that school, we were able to tailor a design that was specific to their needs and made sure that it accomplished their goals, not my goals, as their pedestrians. When we're talking about a regional project, it gets more complicated because you're reaching a greater audience. And so we need to develop strategies that reach out to a greater extent of the population. A colleague of mine mentioned a freeway interchange project that she was working on. And there was a large regional shopping facility nearby. And so what they did is they put project information on placemats and put them in the food court of the regional facility so that you had a place where a phone number there where you could call and provide comments. And they had some graphics so that people could understand what they were trying to accomplish. So they could just expand the scope and reach a larger population. At our city, we did recently updated our comprehensive plan. And as part of that, we made sure that we weren't just reaching our typical population that is very willing to provide input, but to really seek that out and pull it from our residents. And so we went to where residents were. We went to the shopping centers. We went to the faith-based organizations. We went to the community organizations and made it easy for people to fill out a quick survey. And so we're gaining information from a population that we didn't typically hear from. So just to increase the depth of what we were hearing from people. We did the same thing recently for we were looking at a high capacity transit project, and it's easy to survey our existing transit population and to hear their concerns, and certainly that is valuable. The harder part is to find those transit users that might use a high capacity transit facility or that are in a current transit desert, and to hear what they would like if a transit facility touched their neighborhood. And so again, doing that specific outreach in some of those areas and putting in a form that's easily accessible so that they can provide their comments quickly and easily.
So something you said really basically is my next question. You talked about the school and the traffic light. So one of the things we wanted to talk about today was, there's designing your project plan and then there's facilitating it. And so, sometimes that can cause some challenges. So we just wanted to hear from each of you, like what barriers, sorry, what barriers have you experienced and how have you had to course correct mid-strategy when maybe you experience exactly something like what Alyssa talked about? So maybe if we can start with Reagan and then hear from Alyssa and Katie.
So with the aging population, we encounter many barriers for various reasons. So one major barrier is our population often has mobility issues that have to, be addressed in order to, get them engaged. Transportation, which is what we're here to talk about, is a massive barrier for my population. Hesitancy or discomfort being out of their community or their environment is oftentimes a barrier for people, and it keeps them from participating and engaging. Like I just talked about, the lack of technology availability, such as internet, computer, smartphones, lack of that comfort level. And then, as Mr. Armstrong discussed earlier in the first presentation with the Tulsa race riot history, that is a large community that my programs serve. and where transportation is an issue, where we've taken special planning opportunities and grants and done a lot of research in that community with our seniors. Because of that history, there is much hesitancy and trust issues with our older adults in that community. A lot of times they are hesitant to be vocal or share their true feelings, or they fear that their ideas will not be really heard or well received, or that people really don't want to hear what I have to say. And then another barrier would be with our population is, the worry of, am I going to understand what they're talking about? These people from, the COG, they're coming in to talk about, transportation planning or whatever. Am I going to be able to understand what they're saying? Or, is it going to be too high level for me? So those are several of the barriers that we encounter daily with our population.
Yeah, Reagan, I think we experience a lot of the same things. The trust one, I think, is certainly a big a hurdle. Sometimes we have populations that maybe have reached out in the past and no one did anything. And so why should I bother to reach out again? Nobody's listening to me. I think two other things that I'd like to bring up are, first, the time. Sometimes the engagement process is extensive, and that lengthens out a project. And sometimes you don't get the right information that you or enough information, or an unbiased sample. And so you need to take a little bit more time to do a little bit more work on the engagement piece. And transportation projects already take a long time sometimes, depending on the funding source. And so to lengthen that out sometimes makes leadership uncomfortable. And so I think that's a barrier and a challenge. And then I think the other piece is the cost. And Katie mentioned that, there's regional planning and there's these projects, and we talk about bicycle and pedestrian facilities and making sure that there's an interconnected network. But a lot of the time, the way that gets implemented is through the land development process and through private developers. And private developers want to make money because that's what they do, And so if you tell them that I need you to develop a trail project, or I need you to expand this transit facility, and I need you to give up some of your property in order to make this happen, they are sometimes not so willing to do that. So that can be a huge challenge too, is incorporating those facilities into a private developer's design without it ending up at the elected officials' lap to to have a conversation about the importance of either developer's project or the regional interconnectedness of our pedestrian network. So definitely some challenges there on the cost side as well.
Yeah, I would, that you made me chuckle at that, because I'm in the middle of an argument with a developer right now about a project that he keeps telling me he's going to do a multi-use path, and then every design that's put forward doesn't have a multi-use path. And anyway, I think one of the other things that we have been consistently asking the agencies to do here, and none of them have done it yet. And when they don't do this, then we at Charleston Moves, we get our volunteers and we go out and do it. And that is assessing the area where the project is proposed for level of service or level of stress for people on bikes or on foot. That's just it's not part of the process here. And so what we end up getting is we're relying on anecdotal data from people who do weigh in on the proposal, but also we hear a lot from agencies that are frustrated. So they'll, there's one of these right outside my house. They'll stripe a bike lane that is a terrible location for a bike lane, and all they've done is added to the stress of the people who are biking and now using it, because on the front end they didn't go out and stand out there and do an assessment of what would actually contextually work for the vulnerable road users in that location. Every project has vehicular level of service that's put up on the slide. And you know, we've got the public, at least here, is, you know, become experts in vehicular level of service. They all love it. But what we're not discussing is, what is that comfort level? How does the project work from going out and standing there for several hours for a few days a week and watching on the ground? So what we have ended up doing in really high profile projects where it's particularly important to get that right is we'll go out, we'll do bike ped counts at the location. We'll you know, draw the directional, you know, where people are going, where they're trying to get to. People usually will see us out there and to ask what we're doing, and then they'll give us some insight. We've had motorists pull over and want to talk to us about why what's going on isn't working for them either. And then we'll turn that data over to the DOT or whoever's leading the project to try to get that context in, so that the planners can see it and maybe take a step back and say, okay, well, what we were originally thinking doesn't make sense. No one's going to use it. Because the worst thing is spending money on bike ped, people don't use it, and then the agency takes away from that. Oh, well, people don't want this stuff, and then it's just another. But I think that is a huge barrier for us. And then the other barrier, which really came to a head with the pandemic, is broadband access. I mean, the number of people in Charleston, just block by block, who have no to poor internet access, that has been such a tremendous barrier. So many neighborhoods have not had the ability to weigh in on projects that have been proposed over the past year and a half because they don't have internet. And so what we are trying to make sure to do, particularly with the big projects where it just would absolutely be, you know, an abomination if these communities weren't weighing in, is getting ready to canvass, go door to door. And, you know, we've had some difficulty because people are nervous about being out face to face. I'm nervous about it. And so trying to figure out what's a safe way to get our volunteers together and then go out and meet people where they are. So setting up at major bus stops to survey people. You know, we got a lot of really interesting data from folks when we were out there talking to them, but we had to stop doing it because the interaction was too close. And it was nerve-wracking for everybody, and that's been a huge one. That we cannot just rely on internet, and the pandemic really clinched that for us. We were already going out and trying to meet people where they were, but the past year and a half has just really emphasized. And as an example, one of the comprehensive plans locally, the input that they got until they started going out and holding outdoor meetings at key locations, the input they were getting, it was all white suburban residents. They weren't reaching any other members of the community, and they had to sort of reconfigure how they were approaching folks.
So you guys are basically reading my mind on these questions. So our next question I wanted to talk about was exactly that. So, you know, your data is only as good as the people who have access to the survey, show up to the meeting, you know, whatever your method of collection is. So just wanted to talk a little bit more about projects or examples when you had to scrap the data, look beyond the numbers and go a different direction. So Katie's already, you know, kind of talked about this a bit. So I don't know if you have anything more you'd like to add, or Alyssa and Reagan, if you guys want to chime in.
Yeah, the project that I alluded to earlier, called we have a bridge. It's called the North Bridge. It's actually got a lot of different names, which is very South Carolina. But it connects one area of the city of Charleston to the city of North Charleston, and it is an incredibly dangerous bridge. And I think thanks, Emily. It's if you go to the next slide and show how people, on the left, that's how people on bike or on foot are currently crossing that bridge. And these are people who, they have to get to work. They don't have another option. they have to get to appointments. They don't have another option. So they're doing this. And what it's hard to see, but he's got his right foot on maybe a foot wide median. And then DOT placed delineators to try to block people from doing this. So the people who have to are just going around the delineators. And what we've heard a lot from folks who are driving it, they're terrified they're going to hit somebody. So we've got pretty good consensus that this needs to change. And interestingly, this bridge, it was built in the 50s with a sidewalk. When they widened it in the 70s, they removed the sidewalk. And then about 15 years later, our state Supreme Court heard a case where our Charleston County School District was accused of de facto segregation in schools. The county school district's expert used this bridge as a reason why that had to happen, because it would be too unsafe to transport white children to the predominantly Black school on the other side and vice versa. That was their defense. So this bridge is incredibly problematic, is a real emblem of systemic racism in transportation planning. And what we've really had to make sure we are doing, Charleston Moves has been throwing, massive temper tantrums about this bridge for a while, and we're finally getting traction on it. But to Charleston County Council's credit, they have funded the needed conceptual study that we have to have if we're going to solve this problem. But with the pandemic, they set a virtual meeting only for the public to weigh in. So this is one of those circumstances where we're prepping to go out into the field and talk to folks. And we did set up, basically there were surveying stations, but they ended up being conversation stations at locations on either side of the bridge. And we've learned a lot from folks. And what we've learned is our original thought on, we're going to have to build a separate bike ped bridge. Where is it going to touch down on the North Charleston side? We're kind of wrong about where we thought we were going to have to put it based on who we spoke to and how they're using the bridge and where they're trying to get to and from. That was a big eye opener, I think, for all of us around the table. Advocacy group, state government, local government, everybody was really surprised to hear where people are going, why they're using the bridge. And that's changed the entire discussion and also brought more agencies to the table with interest in how to solve it.
I think I'll defer to Reagan, who probably has more direct experience with this, but I do want to say, that all the effort that Katie, that your advocacy group has gone through, I'm glad it's starting to get some fruition now. And I would certainly echo the issues with broadband, and our natural inclination to try and collect data through that digital and virtual source, because it's nice, clean data, right? You can control it with domains, and it's easily entered into a database, so I can quickly analyze it, but it doesn't reach the population that you need. This isn't a transportation topic necessarily, but locally here in Las Vegas, when we shut down the schools, they couldn't find 60,000 kids in our school district. And the initial reaction was to send out an email to the parents and ask them if they needed any broadband or device resources. And so, as you can imagine, they didn't get a significant response. And so we had to shift our strategy to that, to reach out to all the local agencies like mine, but also to start this grassroots effort to reach out to as many organizations as possible that have outreach to the parents and to the kids, to try and find them and match them up with a broadband resource and a device if necessary. So I can certainly understand. It's challenging, and a lot of our initial reactions is, oh, we'll just send out a survey or send out an email, because that's how we interact, but not necessarily how everybody interacts. So, but I will defer to Reagan. I'm sure she has better examples than me.
Well, we've experienced similar things. There's not some magical database out there of every person in, my 3-county area that's 60 and older. So we do have a database of people that we currently serve with services or previously served. So, low hanging fruit, we reach out to them first. But as the school system had to work with partnerships, that's what we have to do. We go into those communities and we say, bring us your people, just so we can get a further reach. So I go back to the North Tulsa community where, the race riots have occurred. They also are a food desert. And we've done a lot of research and planning for that area in regards to transportation and access to nutrition. And some things that have worked and not worked for us during that with our target populations was going to them, being in their domain and making it convenient for them. So whether that was going to senior housing, senior centers, community library, because let's be honest, inviting them down to our downtown, high-rise building, it's uncomfortable. There's transportation issues, mobility, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't work. Taking them out of their community to another neighborhood. Why would we do that? So go to them. Engaging those trusted community leaders and organizations really helped us build a rapport and get buy-in with our target audience so that they would come out and engage and participate. So people like housing coordinators, the senior center directors, and even like the local health providers in the community or health department. Again, I go back to the use of mailers. Yes, there is a cost, but it's so worth it with our population because they are still very used to postal mail and they check their mail. And we've learned that postcards, like maybe a half sheet postcard, so you can get a little bit more verbiage or graphics on there, those work just so well because they're a quick and easy read. It's something they can hang up on the refrigerator. Letters do not work. They do not read them. They toss them. Another thing is when we're surveying, and again, it'd be nice to do an electronic survey. That doesn't work. But what we found to really help us get a good return on those surveys is to give them that stamped return envelope. Yes, there's another cost involved with that, but it's been so beneficial and we've just had a really great return when we offer that to them. What doesn't work? Hanging up a flyer, one Facebook post, come to this public meeting, let's talk about your needs, let's talk about transportation. That's not going to cut it. You've really got to, utilize multiple mediums. Like I've talked about, postcards, other community services, organizations, getting out there in their community. It really takes a multitude of things. Another thing that we've learned that works well is consistent messaging, your branding of your logos, the verbiage that you use. We really try to, have a pleasing color palette for aging eyes. Our font size is always a certain, 13-point font or higher, so that it's an easier read. If you send them tiny print and they can't read it, it doesn't do much good. Another thing, it is a financial cost, but incentives, give them food. If you let them know like, hey, there's going to be snacks here, a giveaway, a drawing for a gift, things like that. And then obviously if there's an option to provide transportation, or if you can work with someone in the community that's a transportation provider that could help, tote people to and from to get them out to your engagement activities. And then another thing that we learned that works really well is telling versus showing. So some of the options that we did is no, in this food desert area, there's not a grocery store. That's why they're a food desert. However, they do have some nearby grocery options, but some of them had never ventured out of their neighborhood or their community to check those options out. Two of them were Hispanic markets, for example. So we set up travel trainings so that they could, one, see how to access public transit, how to schedule that, on-demand ride, or just what it's like to be on a bus with other people, what it's like to use a wheelchair lift. And then when we took them to these stores, we took them to these Hispanic markets and a couple of the other markets near their neighborhood. And we had tours of the grocery stores so that they could have, kind of a level of comfort because they're there with other people that are helping them. So anything that you can do, I think, to really get them involved, to help get their buy-in to it. And then another thing with our population, don't rush them. And I know a lot of our timeframes, it's, we have deadlines, we have timelines, and it's get this done now, get this data now. This grant's only, 6 months, yada, yada. But, and that is definitely a struggle when working with this population. They can't be rushed. They need time to think so they can properly respond. They need a time to be able to build a rapport with you and be comfortable, especially, this particular population. It's mostly minority, low income in this food desert / Tulsa riot area. It's taken a little extra work and time, but I can't tell you how worth it was. I never went in with the idea of, oh, we're going to bring up the history of this community. That wasn't ever on our game plan. But because we met with them so many times, they got to a comfort level with us where they started bringing it up in our discussions. And now, as professionals in our AAA, we can freely go and have conversations with them about it. And there's no, I guess, awkwardness. And so it's just give them time, let them talk, and just really, try to build those relationships with them the best you can in the time frame that you have.
Yeah, I really appreciate you all sharing that. I had sort of a similar experience recently where we were hosting, one of the organizations I work with, we were hosting a COVID-19 vaccination clinic in East Tulsa, which has a high Latino population. And I made a sign up genius and all sorts of things, and no one was signing up. So we went and sat at one of the grocery stores at Morelos, one of the Hispanic grocery stores, and we got 40 people in an afternoon. And, I'll admit I was skeptical when I showed up at that grocery store, but, I was obviously proven wrong very quickly. So it's just a good reminder. So for our last question, before we open it up to Q&A, I just wanted to talk about collaboration. This has kind of come up throughout this panel today. So can you all just speak on the concept of how to collaborate with diverse entities to advocate for your plans and how you found that cooperation to be successful or challenging for your work? And maybe Katie, if you want to start.
Yeah, we, so since, the nature of our work and because we're such a small organization, we are heavily reliant on getting as many other partners involved in outreach and in pushing for things. And again, to use the Northbridge as an example, we now have a Better Northbridge coalition that we've been building and we're continuing to build, but it's going really well because we've been able to bring a lot of organizations to the table who can speak to what the issues are with both sides of the bridge in the communities. So how this project could best serve community members who are going to be most reliant on a safe crossing. So we've got, the Low Country Food Bank. We have organizations that work with older populations, that work with finding housing for folks. We have churches that are getting involved and signing on. Then we have elected officials who are part of the coalition. And it's nice. We have a really broad, we've got conservation groups that are part of it. Everybody's sort of stepping up and getting engaged around this project. And then they're able to reach audiences that we might not be able to. But also to your, when you mentioned you were skeptical about how many folks would sign up if you set up at the grocery store, we, as part of the coalition building that we're doing, you never know. You might only have one person come up to your table, but they might be the right person. It might end up being somebody who's a de facto neighborhood leader, or a lot of the neighborhoods that we are trying to reach in North Charleston, they don't have a neighborhood association or a civic club or anything like that. So you just have to sort of suss out who's got their ear to the ground, who can talk to a bunch of the neighbors. And it's surprising how often that person ends up coming up to a table and saying, hey, what is this? What are you guys doing? I want to be involved. And having this diverse array of other organizations and elected officials and businesses signing on to our coalition and reaching out to their folks, it's just bringing more and more people in. And they know really good ways to reach people on the ground as well that we might have never even thought of. So it's really it's very cool how this is evolving. And we did a very similar thing when we were advocating to get a new bicycle and pedestrian bridge over near our Ashley River bridges between downtown Charleston and the suburb of West Ashley. We ended up finally getting a federal build grant to do that. And that project is underway after literally 100 years of debate over how you get people walking, biking over the Ashley River. And again, that coalition building to make that happen, it was the only way that we were able to get anywhere, because we had diverse neighborhood groups, we had the hospitals, all sorts of different businesses joining us and advocating and reaching their folks as well.
Maybe from ITE's perspective, I can talk a little bit about like our big picture collaboration and some things that have been happening with our organization. We have some traditional partners like the Federal Highway Administration and AASHTO, which is an organization for state and highway transportation officials. And we've long collaborated with them on development of guidance like bicycle and pedestrian documents and streets and highways documents. But in the last several years, we've also started collaborating with NACTO for city transportation officials, with COMTO, which is an organization for minority transportation officials. And I think that has really enriched our conversations about equity, about designing transportation for all users, and about really providing a context-sensitive solution. One of our first collaborations with NACTO was the development of a design guidance for transit interfaces with the street infrastructure. And so the NACTO officials really have their finger on the pulse of what those urban locations need and what the populations in those areas are looking for, and how to make sure that we have an equitable design and that the right away is distributed equitably. The ITE folks then have the expertise to say, okay, this is functionally the best way to design those interfaces and to make sure that they're accomplishing what you need and that we're meeting the design guidance that's out there. And so it was really great collaboration between the conceptual and the practical. So I think those kinds of things have really been working out well for us. And we've done a lot of work lately with walking organizations, safety organizations, transportation and health organizations, because health outcomes in our communities are so dependent on transportation resources. And then also we've been doing work with smart communities and smart cities, because those have equity considerations as well. So if you're putting the most advanced technology only in the more wealthy neighborhoods, it isn't really beneficial for all. Or if you're designing a connected and autonomous vehicle system that doesn't recognize pedestrians or interact well with bicyclists, it's not particularly successful. And so we've been spending a lot of time in that area and making sure that we are connecting with the right organizations so that we can collaborate together and develop overall better products for the people that are designing the transportation system.
I've discussed, collaborations throughout my different responses, so I won't keep going over that, but it's just integral to what we do. But what I would encourage our participants today, if you're needing to do public engagement and you need to get those older adults involved and you're really not either comfortable, experienced, sure of what to do, area agencies on aging are in all 50 states and US territories. We cover every square mile of our country. Reach out. If you don't know who they are, find out who they are. We're friendly people. We want to help. We can, help you get that population involved, either, by offering venues where our seniors are at, or bringing them to you, or or whatever you need, because transportation, I can tell you in Tulsa, it's the #1 requested service that we receive on our senior information line. Everybody needs transportation at some point in their life, typically on a daily basis. And our older adults, have challenges that our working age adults typically don't have. And our people with disabilities have other challenges, especially when it comes to transportation. So it's imperative that we include them and that we engage them. And again, our minority, our low income populations as well, because they are, heavily reliant on transportation. So I would just encourage, if you're not collaborating with other agencies and organizations in your communities, to do so, to reach out, become friends. It has opened so many doors and opportunities for our AAA and for the services that we're able to offer, for funding opportunities, just to have, a sounding board, just to have someone else to talk to and get a different perspective. So so that's what I have to say about that. And the dogs are talking again, so I'm going to go on mute.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing these insights. I think this was a really great conversation, and I loved how many examples there were. I think sometimes we talk at a really high level, and it's just nice to hear like exactly how these things have played out. So I think that was really helpful, and I hope the participants enjoyed it. So I'm going to read a couple questions right now, and if anyone else has any questions, feel free to add them. We have about 8 minutes before lunch. So the first question is from Doug. So he asks, how do we get your group involved in the planning and funding process? Activism at the time of design and construction is typically after the project has been conceived and funding allocated. Therefore, the pushback comes from a lack of funding perspective rather than just not wanting to implement. This puts folks who have similar philosophical ideas at odds with each other unnecessarily during implementation. So when he says your group, I actually don't know which of the three of you he's talking about, but I think just in general, how have you kind of seen this play out?
I mean, I'll say, I'll just be blunt. I force myself into the room on these things, or used to. I don't have to anymore, which is good. So apparently I wasn't so forceful that it was off-putting. My role as an advocate is, or at least I consider my role as an advocate, I need to make sure that I'm in the room for these conversations very, very early on. And a lot of this comes from, as we're developing regional plans, which has been touched on. So we know once those plans are developed, we know what the project priorities are. We have an idea of what's going to be coming along. So I would say nearly every planner and transportation official who has any sort of effect on Charleston County, they're stuck with me. So I'm constantly checking in with them about things. I'm constantly checking plans, checking meeting agendas, committee agendas, because at least here, committees are where the discussion happens. By the time it gets to a full council meeting, like the votes are already done. So we've now reached a point, and as I mentioned before, I've been here for 23 years. I've been with Charleston Moves for 4, but I've been with other advocacy groups before that. So I've reached a point where most entities know that they'll check in. If I don't know something's going on and they see something coming along, they'll reach out to me and give me a heads up and very nicely ask for my input. It's lovely. And we just, being very persistent is what has built these relationships, and also has me very aware of what's coming down the pike. I don't want to jinx that and be surprised by something later today, but it's rare that I'm surprised by something being proposed. I've usually been very aware of it before it's official.
It sounds like persistence and maybe even capacity building of the advocacy organizations is really something that could help with that.
Yeah, my time management is terrible. I don't have like my work-life balance. There isn't one, so I will say that. But I care about what I'm doing, so that to me makes up for it. But I think to what the person who's asking, I make friends with advocacy organizations that you think are sharing your interests, and just, you know, have lots of conversations all the time.
So I used to work at the health department, and I would always go to planning commission meetings. And my boss, Susan, who's on this call, she was like, "Why are you always here?" And then she asked me to be a planning commissioner. So I think that's just another example of, you know, you just show up long enough and people expect you're supposed to be there. So someone else asked, how is ITE promoting the update of the MUTCD update process? What are the expectations of changes that will help achieve more equitable transportation infrastructure? Do you think warrants for pedestrian infrastructure will be modified? So that's, I think, for you, Alyssa.
That's a great question, and I appreciate whoever asked that. For those of you that don't know, the MUTCD is the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It's the document that says a stop sign has to be red with white letters and have 8 sides. It's been around for a really long time. There is a notice of proposed amendment out right now. Actually, either yesterday or today is the deadline for comments. And it's been a challenge because we haven't had a new manual in 12 years. And the last update came out in 2009. And this document has a lot of impact on how our transportation systems look. The striping on the road, the signage that we use, how and when we install traffic signals or pedestrian beacons. And it has been a real challenge because we've had 12 years of new research on things that should be included and how they should be done. And agencies are allowed to test things, but they have to get permission from the Federal Highway Administration in order to do that. And so it can be a challenge. And so what ITE has done, we issued our letter about a week and a half ago, if I recall. We gathered comments from our membership and also specifically from our technical and employer councils about all of those topics. And you hit the nail on the head. Bicycle infrastructure was a big one that we had a lot of comments on, and that our members talked about. And there's some things in there, like there are too many shall conditions that require you to put in things that may or may not be necessary depending on the context of the project. It doesn't allow for as much flexibility as is necessary in the real world. So we have a lot of comments there. Generally, we have comments about making sure that we are looking at designs for all users, not just personal vehicle users. We made a suggestion that either some more care needs to be taken in looking at pedestrian infrastructure, or perhaps a whole new pedestrian section needs to be created. And then even from a bigger picture, the process needs to change. It needs to happen more quickly. It needs to be more flexible. We need a way to experiment that isn't as complicated as it is now, and still provides that liability protection for people that are willing to try some new things. And so I can't remember how long our letter is, but it's pretty extensive. But again, the focus on all users, protecting vulnerable users, a focus on safety, a focus on equity, and then the changes that are necessary to do things a lot more quickly. We can't wait another 12 years for this document to be updated. So those are all the things that we've asked the Federal Highway Administration to take a look at.
Alyssa, I think I cut you off on the last question, so I apologize for that. So if anyone else has anything to add about these new MUTCD standards, please chime in. I don't want to cut you off. But I think we probably have time for one more question. I know we're going to lunch, so we have a long break, so we can maybe take an extra 5 minutes. So I'll just ask this last question from Barbara. How do you target specific audiences based on anticipated future growth of an area? So for example, an area changing from families with small children to empty nesters means that neighborhood playgrounds or something like that needs will change as fewer children are present.
I mean, I think that comes with, and again, I'm so South Carolina specific, so I apologize, but you know, our municipalities are required to do a comp plan every 10 years. And I think that's that's the comp plan process. So you're anticipating future land use needs, future population needs, laying out all of those expectations in your comp plan document. And I know the city of Charleston in particular, for this time around, they're finishing theirs up. But they, if you're familiar at all with Charleston, you can guess that water is a huge element of the comp plan this time around, and assessing drainage basins. And finally, you'd think we would have already been doing this, but identifying where not to build. that's going to be a new thing for Charleston, 30 years too late, but finally happening. But also assessing where we've got high ground predicted for the next 50 years, reshifting denser development to those areas, and also examining the age of the population that expected to be there, housing affordability. That's another huge one that, again, looking at census data, looking at the current economic data, anticipating land use values, housing needs, housing stock, and population types that need to be sort of redirected to different dry locations.
Well, again, thank you all so much. I want to just finish with an observation someone added to the Q&A. So this person is anonymous, so I'm not sure who it is, but they said something that really hits me, especially reflecting on the previous section, is the fact that this panel is 3 females. It's just wonderful to see women leading the way in their professions to make an impact. Great work advocating for your communities, ladies. So just wanted to end with that, and thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your insights. And I'm sure everyone really got a lot out of this and really found this very interesting. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll take a break for lunch. We'll start again at 1:15. We will leave the Zoom session going. It's just one big room all day. So I think if you leave, you're welcome. I mean, it'll be easy to come back, but you can also just, leave this up, and we will be back at 1:15. Thank you so much for attending this morning.